before that, can I rush to the defense of Islam, and in fact of Palestinian Islam, and in fact of radical Salafi Palestinian Islam?
Please do, please.
We have inside the world of Palestinian Islam, which is different from, Malaysian Islam. It's a different mental and cultural universe, even if it shares sort of some basic theology, we'll call it, and texts. We have both sides in a stark way to that equation. In other words, there is an Islam that they can reach out to, a set of ideas and interpretations of history that they can reach out to and build a different path. And we have it in a political party called Ra'am. The Ra'am political party within Israel, among Israeli Arabs who have many layered identities, one of them is Palestinian, of course, is a party that was born out of the same Muslim Brotherhood ideological world as Hamas. And in the 1980s, its founder, the founder of the Islamic Movement of Israel, which is the ideological counterpoint to Hamas within Israel, a guy named Nimir Darwish, is a supporter of exactly Hamas's line. This is, I think, 1983-4. This is just before the founding of Hamas in 87. And he supports violent terrorism. And he actually gets arrested by the Israelis. And he spends a couple of years in an Israeli prison for planning a terror attack. And he gets out and he flips to, within this world of Salafism, this restorationist Islam of return to the old piety that will bring us back as powerful agents in history. Within that whole intellectual world, there are pacifist, essentially, options. And he turns to that pacifist option. And when he does so, the Islamic Movement of Israel, which he founded, splits in two. The northern branch sticks with the Hamas line. Its head, Raed Salah, actually gets arrested, and they supports terrorism over the years, and it's now illegal in Israel. Its southern branch, whose most of its constituency is the Bedouin community of the south, which also some sections of it serve in the Israeli army. It becomes a basically pacifist. It's a little more complex in Islam what pacifism is, but basically a pacifist movement of integration into Israeli society. There are religious leaders belonging to the Ra'am party. The Ra'am party, by the way, is headed by a guy named Mansour Abbas, who was a student of Nimir Darwish and comes from that more peaceful camp of the Muslim Brothers. Some of the religious leaders of the Ra'am political party have issued a Muslim religious ruling, a halachic ruling for Jews, in which, just to truly cartoonishly simplistic, but just to explain what the ruling was, because it was shocking and goes to exactly what Islam, what Hamas is and how Palestinian Islam works. Within this Sharia law, there's about 95% of Sharia law that is how Muslims should behave inside Islam, and maybe 5% how Muslims should behave outside Islam, in the lands of the Christians, in the lands of the Hindus, whatever. These religious leaders, figures connected to the Ra'am party, who set the religious tone for the Ra'am party, which is an officially Islamist party, ruled that the Sharia of Palestinian Arabs in Israel is the 5%. Okay? Now, everybody who heard this should have fallen off their chair. Because what did they actually say? They said the Jewish state is a Jewish state, not Islamic territory right now. Why? I don't know why. God. You know God? I don't know God. Neither of us is God. But obviously that's God's plan right now. And therefore it is okay that Israel is Jewish. Mansour Abbas of the Ra'am party has given interviews over the last 4 years, publicly, in Hebrew, telling Israelis, I want you to know, it's okay that Israel's Jewish. It's a Jewish state. The Jews need a state. It's their state. Also, you owe the Palestinians a state. Also, you owe us, better funding and better attention and not neglect and less discrimination and all the problems we have in Israel. But Israel can be a Jewish state. Now, what's fascinating to me is, and Ra'am, by the way, wants to sit in coalitions. And for the very first time, an Arab majority political party sat in a coalition in the last government because they choose not to. And this one chose to. In other words, the most pro-integration, pro-equality, pro-Israel political faction among all Palestinian politics is an Islamist outgrowth of the Muslim Brothers. And Hamas, which is willing to sacrifice Gaza literally on the altar of the destruction of Israel, is the Muslim Brothers, from the same roots come these two radically different options.
Is that in some way like the mirror image of the ultra-Orthodox Jews who believe that God will take care of establishing Israel? Is not our place to do it?
Yes, it rhymes. In other words, a big part of Salafis, of these ideas, we use these words in English, but basically, for the last, century and something, these Muslim theologians in the Arab world have been asking, how do we ever become so weak? What happened to us? Why are we so backward? We used to be the center of science and power and commerce. And the answer they gave is the sort of classically Islamic answer, right? Because Islam was incredibly successful in its early centuries. And they interpreted that success as a sign that they're in sync with God's divine plan for history. That's why they're doing well in history. And so if the last 300, 400 years Islam is falling behind, they're no longer in sync with God's plan. The problem is essentially piety. So if we become more pious, return to God, the geopolitics and the economics will sort themselves out. That's the basic underlying fundamental theory of all these groups, of the pacifist ones and of the Al-Qaedas, all of them. That's, by the way, why Hamas is willing. The idea of destroying Israel carries a huge sway among these people because the Jews are the weakest people to ever push Islam back, and therefore Islam's return into history, they're the first thing that has to be destroyed as Islam becomes a conquering empire again. So we have to get the Jews first because the Jews are the weakest thing that ever pushed us back and the sign of Islamic weakness at its height. Long story short, what the Ram people say is, but wait a second, if the Jews are successful in history, based on the theory that success in history proves that you're in sync with the divine plan for history, because God oversees the history and therefore history arcs toward justice, etc., God must want this to be here now, or it wouldn't be here now, on account of how that's what a God is, right? So we, as people, when you talk to people like Mansour Abbas, they say, you know why I don't need to kill your children? Because I'm an actual man of faith, unlike Hamas. The idea that Islam's dignity can't return, that Islam as a power in history can't return into history, powerful, unless I murder everybody's children, is a disastrous lack of. That is Islam at its most pathetic. That is the weakness. And I am a man of faith who knows that I don't have to do that. And by the way, says Mansour Abbas, at the end of history, all of you are becoming Muslim anyway. So I can wait, right? That's basically that mindset.
So how does Israel nourish that positive wing of Islam so that, as I said earlier, so that in our futures, our grandchildren might be living in a peaceful side by side with the Palestinians?
The one thing we can do, and it's the only thing we can do, we can't socially engineer them. We're not smarter than them. We can't fake it. They're not taking their cues on Islam from us. I say that only because I see a lot of people in the West saying things like, how do we socially engineer these societies to not be screwed up? No, everybody is smart. Everybody's three-dimensional. Palestinians understand what's happening to them. So do Israelis. None of us are idiots. But I think the one thing that is in our power to do is that when that hand is offered, to take it and to say, you are who you are, we are who we are, we can live here successfully. And if we don't do it with them, then certainly a great deal of the problem is with us.
And has Israel been guilty of not doing that?
They were in a coalition for a year and a half. Likud ran a campaign against them being in a coalition, but 10 minutes before that campaign, trying to demonize the Bennett-Lapid government, the last government, for sitting with, quote, the Muslim Brothers. But to me, that's exactly the point. Yes, they were sitting with the Muslim Brothers. That's the astonishingly beautiful, wonderful thing, that is exactly what happened. But Likud tried to demonize it. 10 minutes before Likud demonized it, Likud itself had reached out to them, hoping to secure their votes for a Likud coalition. So the impediments are entirely political. And I think, hopefully I'm not being too optimistic, but there is a future Palestinian Islam that is Hamas and what I just believe to be self-destruction for Palestinian society. And there's a future Palestinian Islam born from deep within Palestinian society and culture and language and religion, and without any help from Israel and any even community. Most Israelis don't have any idea why Ram suddenly became pro-Israel. What a weird development. Ram, the Islamist party among Israelis. By the way, in the last 4 years since they've been talking that way, they've also become the biggest political party of the Arab community in Israel. So this is a popular view among Arab Israelis.